Hello, welcome to Cinema Savvy, and welcome back to another film review. We actually have a film out in some way, shape, or form. This is on Netflix currently. This is, of course, Mank. This is David Fincher's latest film, biographical film, sorry, about the making of the script writing process behind Citizen Kane, which is considered to be, I won't say it's my favorite, but it's considered to be, among many film fans, the greatest film of all time. This is like an untold story. And I was sort of doing a little bit of reading before this. Apparently, this is based on an article, like a theory that someone posed, Pauline Kael, in 1971, saying that Orson Welles, the director, producer, writer, starring in of Citizen Kane, didn't deserve the screenwriting credit. So, right off the bat, this is a film that's about making films. This is a film about films, and it's very much wrapped in that 1930s old Hollywood style. I guess we can go to first off the poster for this thing. I love the poster for this thing, but I could even when you just brought it up there before we went live, it just looks like Jack Nicholson, and I can't get over that.
Yeah.
But anyway, we're going to get into the film proper in a moment, but we'll go over to the socials first thing, and then we'll dive deep into this film.
Definitely, guys. As usual, we've announced this not too late. We did a couple of posts today for this, but this is a big release, as Chris said, a new big release. We also have Wonder Woman 2 coming out in the next couple of weeks, which we're looking forward to, brackets dependent on the tier system. For those of you watching in England, you know exactly what nonsense we're talking about. That aside, the best way to find out when we're going live, as usual, is to find us on Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy. We've done a couple of posts today about some things to expect in the week. Obviously, we've been doing our Rocky reviews. We've got Snorlax to catch up with. We've got Mandalorian videos. So, as usual, best way to find out what we're going to do, when we're going to do it, is by following us on those social media formats. And we do have a link to the TeePublic in the description below. But the main thing for today, if you are David Fincher fans, if you're Gary Oldman fans, if you're Orson Welles fans, then if you like what we're doing, like what we're talking about, don't forget to like, comment, and share. We obviously like getting the good word out. We love these discussions. This film's a bit different to what we've discussed recently, which is great. And of course, if you do appreciate this, do like where it's coming from, hit that subscribe button, because granted, Oscar season is going to be very different next year. Mm-hmm. It's going to be in April, but this is one of the heavy hitters. That's when the calendar came out at the start of the year, and you have a look through, and it's like new David Fincher film starring Gary Oldman about making Citizen Kane. Now, it doesn't take someone with a lot of film knowledge to know that that's an Oscar film on paper. On paper, that's a big Oscar film, and
the Academy love films about films, don't they? Especially, I mean, if you're throwing in Citizen Kane in there, then it's a no-brainer for Academy Award season next year.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, even going into it, this is a big thing with it that, you know, I'm not going to say it's an Oscar bait film. David Fincher picks his projects wisely. That's a really important thing with his work. He's probably in my top 5, definitely top 10 directors. He's in everything, I think, except Panic Room, Benjamin Button, and Dragon Tattoo. And it was really exciting to see him attached with Gary Oldman, who we all love. Is phenomenal in pretty much everything he's in. Won his Oscar, obviously, playing Churchill. And I was really sold on that. And I'm not to jump into it straight away, I'm not the biggest fan of black and white films. Is that like it's appropriate to the era, this in that Schindler's List sense of things, that they're trying to build that timeless environment. And we'll go into that later on, but everything was looking good for this heading forwards, and Fincher does his sort of Fincher stuff, causes a bit of shenanigans in the press, people getting offended by everything he says, just because he starts going in on people, which is quite amusing to read if you haven't seen it. But really, the core of this as well is that this is a screenplay that his dad wrote in the 90s, and his dad passed away in the early noughties, and he's kept his dad as the sole credit. We don't know if he's changed anything, but there was a plan to film this before Fight Club and after The Game, which would have been very interesting.
Especially the cast that they originally had for that thing, or certainly the lead. Everyone's favorite Kevin Spacey was going to be in the lead, which, hey, if you asked me back in the 90s or in the 2000s, I'd be like, hell, great casting, fantastic actor. But it was going to be Kevin Spacey, Jodie Foster, and I think they could have made it work. I think they would have been good, but I don't know what took him so long to do it. You know, like, you think that if it was a personal project to him, he would have got it done quick, but here we are in 2020 and it's finally here, so...
Yeah, and I think that's a really good thing, that with the films he's done, it is one of those where, okay, he took his time to do it, and bringing it into it, I could not see Kevin Spacey playing this. Now I've seen Gary Oldman do it. I couldn't imagine anyone else, even looking at photos of what it might look like in real life. Gary Oldman's not exactly a spitting image, but when you look him in the film, you can see that, okay, I can see the resemblance, I can see what they're trying to do with him. And I think for that kind of alcoholic-esque character that's struggling, he's fighting internally while he's trying to hold other people together, Gary Oldman has that when he wants to have that sort of polite wit, that charm, he has all of that. When he wants to be drunk and saying what he needs to say, Gary Oldman can deliver on all ranges. So I thought, as far as lead actor goes, I think Gary Oldman was perfect for this, and he's believable. I did see Gary Oldman. I kind of text you straight away, like, wow, this opening scene sounds familiar. Like, sends you a photo of Commissioner Gordon in the hospital bed. I think he's great, and I think, it's weird talking Oscars again because we've been so long without it. He's probably a shoo-in for nomination for lead actor right now.
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I mean, like, it's Gary Oldman, isn't it? Like, the guy should have been nominated or at least won a whole bunch of Oscars before this point. Anyway, we know that he made his win off The Darkest Hour, which he was fantastic in. I definitely think he'll be nominated. It's difficult to say who I'd like to see win, because we haven't had that volume of Oscar films in yet to make that decision, but I definitely think he has a good shot at it. I mean, there's a scene in this film, again, not to go too much into spoilers. It's very difficult to talk about spoilers with this film because it is that biographical film, isn't it? So you have to take so much of it at face value for what it is. But there is a monologue that he has towards the end of this film around a dinner table. And we did some research before this. Apparently, Charles Dance has gone on record saying that shot took 100 takes. That is mad, because this is a long monologue. This goes on for a long while, but Gary Oldman's just giving it everything. The script as well is really sharp, and it's that quick talking, wisecracking 30s kind of dialogue that you get in a lot of films, and that sort of it goes into like the political situation of even like the movie studios and everything, and how it's always, words firing left, right, and center. It's a really, really sharp script, and I think that Gary Oldman brings that through in his performance fantastically as well. Really, all the performances in this thing as well. Amanda Seyfried, who I've never been like a massive fan of, she's fine, but I've never been gravitated towards her as an actress or anything. I thought she was outstanding in this film. I don't know if you go so far as to call her lead actress. I mean, I guess she is. She's kind of a supporting role for a lot of this film. But so much of her character and who she is ties into the overall theme of the film and the dilemma that the main character has towards the end, whether he wants to go ahead with his script or not. Before we go into any more of the film, though, I guess we sort of need to talk about our history with the film that it's based around, Citizen Kane. So, and I think ultimately this is where my overall opinion of the film comes in, and where I think that a lot of people are either going to love this film or just be completely alienated by this film. I think that if you haven't seen Citizen Kane, if you don't know much about it, you are going to be more or less lost. I think you should be okay with it, but it really goes into a lot of things with this film, and not just the film itself, but the situation. You've got these, like hierarchies of power in the movie studios, and everyone answers to someone else. And it goes into like the political situation of the US at the time, and it goes into all these different avenues. And if you're not at least clued up on any aspect of that, I think you're going to be completely lost for the most part, or you're not going to be able to get as much as what I think you should be able to get from this film. Citizen Kane is a film that I've watched once many years ago. I think it was done on a whim where I was trying to cross off all those big films that I probably should have seen. Somehow I didn't watch this at uni doing like media studies. It seems like this is a film that always gets thrown around or talked about with like film theories and film deconstruction and everything. It's not an entertaining film. I can understand why, especially for the time it was made, like non-linear storytelling, different camera techniques, lighting, all the components that we take for granted in films now did more or less originate from that film in the 1940s. And judging by the films that came out before that time, it would have been completely groundbreaking, and no one would have seen a film structured like that. But watching it now, it's very dry. It's not my kind of film. I appreciate it for what it is. So that's really where I'm coming at Citizen Kane from with this thing. So this is an interesting film, man, going into all these things. I mean, loads of these people involved I didn't know about. Even the screenwriter I never really paid much attention to, even though winning the Oscar joint with Orson Welles, that's like a big thing for this film. So I was kind of alienated by a lot of it, but I knew enough about the film. I knew that, certain shots in this film were done to replicate the lighting or the staging of what was done in Citizen Kane. There's a bunch of references in the film, like the room trashing at the end of the film where he says, "Oh, that'll make a good moment in the film." And he notes it down. There's a lot of references like that. But I mean, George, I don't know what you're like with Citizen Kane, but how did you find this? And do you think that maybe you needed to watch it before watching this film?
Definitely. So my history is I've never seen it. I only know of it via its reputation. I've never bought it. I've never seen it. I don't even know if it's on a streaming service. My knowledge is next to nothing except it's the Orson Welles experience, and everyone tells you have to watch it because it is the greatest film in history. Same people the same ones say that Casablanca is the best film in history. Said, I'm sorry, but the same people as having the same two best films in history doesn't quite add up to me. That being said, it's not a film I've just avoided for the sake of it. It's more, being honest, when I was at college, in my late teen years, probably the same with you, that's when you're like, tick this, tick this, tick this. I got to get this done, that done. And it was just one of them where I never dieted back to that. There's a couple of that sort of golden age of Hollywood. I think it's a really nice way to put it. I've not seen the outright classics from that era. And going into this was an interesting experience because when I think of films about making films, I think of Hail Caesar. Granted, that was completely fictional. It was set in the studio system, kind of not in the day in the life of, but you had a couple of small stories that come together and it creates something bigger. You've also got Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, set in the 60s, the end of the studio system, as that was all coming to a close and TV was the new thing. And then obviously we've got The Disaster Artist, which is just incredible. And there's probably a couple more I've forgotten, I'm not going to lie. But when I think of films about the making of films, maybe I took this from a different approach. I don't know if this would be with following the screenwriter on set or his process. Well, obviously, we got to delve into the life. Granted, if you didn't know anything about Mank, it was quite difficult before. So I discovered while watching this that he actually wrote, he did a lot of work on The Wizard of Oz. He's responsible for all the Kansas scenes, and that he's essentially what we call today, if you don't know, a script doctor. Which is still, a term basically everyone gets credited for what they do. Granted, it appears in the studio system he was writing the full scripts and not getting credited, which is a kind of like, I guess, a variation of it. So I went into this knowing nothing about anyone. The only thing I know of Orson Welles is that he's a unicorn in Transformers. I've not seen anything else he's ever been in. Granted, that was, as you said, like a day's work. So I was kind of really intrigued because going back to Disaster Artist, I'd not seen The Room either. I didn't even know it via reputation that much. And I looked at that film and, wow, that's insane. I really want to watch The Room now. I watched Citizen Kane. Sorry, I didn't watch Citizen Kane. I saw Mank today, and I don't have that effect. Now, maybe because it's not a comedy, maybe because it's not them on set. This was a delve into essentially how, not corrupt the studio system is, but as you mentioned, that sort of political aspiration of the studios back then. They did dictate these people's lives. You get a really great scene where they're like, why on earth did you go and check out a Warner Brothers film? We're MGM. You could have come to our cinema and watched our films. And that did exist back then. And getting little pockets of information at the industry at the time, I really enjoyed. But then so much of it just went over my head. Now, it's not too hard to follow, but maybe because I went in expecting to learn about Citizen Kane, I kind of didn't. And maybe the whole film, maybe I missed the point. It's like a metaphor of what is Citizen Kane. I know that ultimately the form, obviously he mentioned it in the speech anyway, but Citizen Kane takes the form of what Mank writes, and what Mank writes about is the people he knows that we see in this film. I think that's the core of the story. And absolutely. For myself. And it was fine to follow, but I just didn't get that wow factor. And this is what kind of leads me onto it. Is it because I've missed the point of the film? I don't know. Is it because I don't know about Citizen Kane? I don't know. But as a Fincher fan, I was genuinely quite disappointed with this because I was chatting to you before we hit live, like some of my 7's in my top 10 films of all time. Fight Club I absolutely adore. I studied that at college, seen that hundreds of times, had to. Then you've got things like The Game, which I also love. Fincher, someone I've kind of gone back to. Social Network, I've not seen enough. Gone Girl, I absolutely love. It's one of the most intimidating films I've ever seen in my life. And when it says David Fincher's doing this biopic, I was like, okay, this is going to feel like something different. But this ultimately feels like a film that I don't want to say anyone could have made. That sounds horrible, but this didn't strike me as a David Fincher film. It didn't have what his other films have, and you get moments of these great bits, but ultimately it just didn't have anything for me. We've got the one phenomenal scene at the dinner table. We've got a really good character development scene when they talk about the current state of politics, i.e. 1940, World War II is happening, but America's not actually involved. You get a bit of current political situation with Democrats and liberals back then, and you get these lovely little insights, but it never delves into it too much. It just kind of glosses over it, and I think that's where it lost me, that I felt like it was trying to be... I think it felt like it was trying to fit in more than what it needed to for the 2 hours. It didn't feel like this was the making of the film. But the question then goes back to, is that because I've not seen Citizen Kane? And is it glaringly obvious if I had seen Citizen Kane that all of this was applying towards that?
Yeah, no, I think the whole making of Citizen Kane, it's really just that's the scaffolding essentially for what the film's based on. But then you've got all these other aspects, and I mean, the character of I need to find the character's name. I really don't know. Citizen Kane, Jesus Christ. It's like Charles Foster Kane, or so. I think it's Charles Foster Kane. His character is based off of William Randolph Hearst, a real person played by Charles Dance in this film, and it's really all the naysayers about the script saying, you know, it's non-linear, like audiences aren't going to gravitate towards a drama film like this. This is completely different, and the ramifications of basing this film quite clearly on this guy who's really the head honcho, who's paying everyone's wages and doing all this thing and has that complete control, what that means not just to him but all the people around, like Amanda Seyfried's character and everyone like that. I think you can also draw parallels as well to Gary Oldman's character in the film, to Charles Foster Kane, in that he does have this descent as the film goes on. We learn towards the end of the film, in real life, I think he died at the age of 55 with complications of alcoholism. We see him becoming more irate, and he has this whole big monologue at the end saying that you started out as an idealist and now you've become this sort of shell who you once were. And maybe even Gary Oldman was sort of like putting some of himself into that script as well. So you've got all these threads, you've got all these parallels going on, which again I probably would have appreciated even more, been able to look more into if I had have seen Citizen Kane. The film itself is stylized very much in that, well, I mean, it's filmed in black and white, as like that's the big thing about it. But you get those little spots in the corner, which were like indicators just to change the film reels and everything like that. And I appreciated some stuff like that. Yeah, I felt like they could have dialed that up more. It's like, again, going back to Once Upon a Time in Hollywood is another great example. Tarantino's so good at, you know, those clips in Once Upon a Time in Hollywood where it shows you some of those old TV shows that Rick Dalton made in the old films. It really gives it that authentic sense. You know, even the sound, the picture ratio and everything like that felt so much of that time. You could believe that you're watching something from that decade. I never really had that with this. It did feel like, you know, very crisp, very HD, with a black and white filter over it. Now, I'm sure he actually filmed it in black and white. I think that was one of the things that delayed him, actually, is that he wanted to film it in black and white. I don't know why that would take so long to do, especially by, you know, 2000 standards. I expect that would be easy practice to do. But it didn't feel, I would say, authentic to the time. The soundtrack was great. And the sound, yes. Yeah, exactly. It felt modern with this sort of like 1930s sheen thrown over it, and it didn't give me that sense of authenticity which films like Once Upon a Time in Hollywood did with those moments.
Yeah, and I think going back to when we spoke about Chicago 7, my really big criticism was it felt like a film made in 2020, shot in 2020, pretending to be just last century. Now, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, great point. We spoke about Mangrove, how it had that 70s Britain vibe, Hollywood 60s America vibe. So many of these period pieces do it. Shouldn't exist. Granted, it is almost 30 years ago now. When you watch that looks like the 40s, the way it's shot. It doesn't look modern, as in for the 90s. It doesn't look like it was made in the 90s to be in the 40s. It looked age appropriate. It looked like you're watching a documentary from that era. It's what you mentioned. It was crisp. It was full HD. It was the 4K stuff to it. And I'm not going to criticize Netflix for it. No, not at all. But when Netflix only commission things, I'm not saying they can, don't make a film in HD. That's absurd. But when it's Netflix productions, which their period pieces stand out horribly, like they're postmodern, that's when I start to get a bit funny. Now, this doesn't need an aspect. I'm glad they didn't do the normal Netflix aspect ratio of that horrible, is it 178:1, where it's like a tiny centimeter bar. This was the traditional. Yeah. This was traditional letterbox, and there's some things like that. But it's hard to get these films, and black and white is a very interesting format, because the point of black and white is it needs to look like it came from that time, that you could watch. The whole point of Shins is you can watch that at any decade, any age, and it puts you in the 1940s, because you don't notice the aging on the camera equipment, the curtains, the wardrobes. It feels like you're from that time. I just didn't get that with Mank, and I appreciate what Fincher was trying to do. The sets looked phenomenal. The production design was nigh perfect. It just felt like when these actors appeared, and it's not because they're modern actors, it just felt like, oh look, they're just stepping back to do something that time. I didn't get that modern vibe, and I think that's what throws me with these black and white films. We're on a bit of a black and white renaissance. If you want to talk about the Logan black and white cut, the Mad Max black and white cut, the Parasite black and white cut, all these things, and there's getting more of it, and I appreciate it to an extent.
It was The Artist as well. That like really kickstarted it, I think, didn't it? Did that win Best Picture that year?
Won Best Film, yeah. And that was obviously the silent era. But then with this, it just felt like there was something missing overall. And I don't know, I can't put my finger on it, but the Fincher stuff for black and white, I'm going to make that Netflix point again. It's the great thing with Netflix, they give their directors, their producers complete control. Obviously, we know David Fincher's history of Alien 3. He helped make House of Cards, which was Netflix's first ever show. He's just signed a new Netflix deal to be exclusively working for them again. They do have a very important place, and it to me goes back to that question of, did the studio decline this from David Fincher over the last 20 years? We don't know. You know, I'm not going to sit here and do who, what's next that we don't know about, but this was meant to be after Seven. You know, in 1990s, after the game, in late 90s, Fincher wasn't at that level he is now of, I can say what I want, do what I want. He was at that point very young. He'd had Alien 3, he hadn't cemented that legacy, and I think now it might be like, I'm trying to forget the name of the director. It's when they say, you know, I've had this idea for 20 years and it's not come together. Aaron Sorkin tried Chicago 7, which was meant to get made 10 years ago and didn't. I wonder if there's a bit of that to it where Netflix will give them that sort of blank check. And there's nothing wrong with that. It is a very important tool for modern cinema, for modern audiences. But sometimes, you know, I'm not going to use this as an example. This is more just streaming as a platform. The problem with streaming is that Netflix will say yes to almost anything, and you get a lot of trash. You get weekly trash, but amongst it, you'll get, you know, an Irishman, you'll get a Mank, you'll get something worthwhile. And I think Mank, sort of overall, I don't know if I'm jumping ahead too late because I did love the soundtrack too. Mank felt like it was trying to juggle too much from an era in one. I think it was well made. I think the script was well written. It was well performed. I just personally didn't have the interest in it. I think it's so self-pompous of that golden age of Hollywood. It's sort of flagging the, look, we're in the golden age of Hollywood, so we're going to do what we want. And to compare it to Hail Caesar is, of course, fictional. Hail Caesar does it in a far more engaging thing. Granted, it's two completely different stories. It's hard for me to watch this film and not think of going, I really want to watch Hail Caesar, because you don't get enough of an insight into the production of the film in terms of via the studio or via Orson Welles. They're just juggling 6 or 7 small things together to say, okay, this was how he did it, when really there's more nuances along the way which are ignored. But overall, I thought it was fine. I just have a couple of issues, and it's not had the impact on me it has on some other people. I think that's probably a better way of putting it.
Yeah, and I think you're going to have that divide, like people like hardcore film critic people, you know, like really into film, you know, even into Citizen Kane, kind of that era of Hollywood, essentially. I think they'll appreciate this film. Not that I wanted this to be another Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, but I would have liked, my favorite aspects of this film were, there's a scene where they're shooting a film, they're on set, and this conversation between Gary Oldman and Amanda Seyfried, as you know, they've got the camera tracks and they're filming horses ride up. Love that stuff. Love the moments where they're pitching the original Frankenstein, they mention Wizard of Oz, and it's those moments felt authentic. It's just sort of how the film was crafted. I did love the cinematography in this thing. I did want to mention that, actually. I thought the cinematography was beautiful in this film. I can definitely see it being nominated, possibly even winning in that category. I know there's a lot of films that we still need to see. So those authentic moments, they were the moments that I gravitated towards, but so much of the rest of this film felt like it was trying to be an imitation of Citizen Kane, rather than telling this story about, you know, how it was made and the power struggle between everyone involved, which I know inherently this film was about, but I think it could have focused up maybe a little bit more. Maybe it's just because I don't know much about it, and maybe I need to do more research and digging in it, and then maybe I can go back to this film and take more away from it than I did. It just felt like an imitation, like down to the camera angles, down to the lighting of Citizen Kane. It's like, don't try and be Citizen Kane, just tell this story that needs to be told, you know. So there was a bit of a disconnect with me there. Trial of the Chicago 7 is a perfect example, because we all had that criticism towards that film. I don't think this is a bad film by any stretch of the imagination. Performances are fantastic. It is great direction, I think, from Fincher. Again, it might not be his strongest film, but it's still a powerhouse director behind the camera doing this thing. The script's great, but I think it's just because I don't have that investment and I don't have that knowledge, that prior knowledge for this film. I didn't get the most out of it like some people would. I don't know what general consensus is on this film. I don't know if it's mostly popular, if it is creating that divide critically. I'm not sure, but I'm glad. I said this last year with all the films that we had, like The Irishman, for example. I'm glad that Netflix is giving these films a chance.
Yeah.
Because that's a good point. This film probably wouldn't have been chosen by the studio to get made or pushed or anything, and I doubt it would have made much of its money back. Maybe it would have from like the Fincher diehards who would go and see it, but I don't know if it's a film that needs multiple viewings, would get asses in seats essentially. It's one I might go back to at some point. I might give this a rewatch just before we get to Academy Awards season next year. But yeah, it didn't have that staying impact with me like I think a lot of people expected it would. But that's pretty much my final thoughts on this film. I think we should pass it over to everyone else now. So if you've seen Mank, it is on Netflix at the moment. Let us know what you think of Mank. Be sure to like, comment, share, subscribe. Let us know your thoughts on Citizen Kane. Do you consider it the best film ever made? Or are you more just like a casual fan, or do you not know much about it? Anything regarding this movie, Citizen Kane, or any of Fincher's previous work, please do let us know. We will be back on Tuesday for a very emotional experience of Rocky Balboa. We are almost, we're completing the Rocky saga, I will say, in a way. There might be some surprises that we announce on Tuesday. But that's going to be really fun to talk about that. We've had a blast talking about the rest of the Rocky films at the moment, and that is the one where the waterworks are definitely going to be turned on. It's definitely the emotional one. And we have a lot planned for December. We have a whole schedule filled. We've got more retro reviews coming up as we are finishing off Rocky. We will be moving into new things as well. So definitely follow us on socials for all the information on that. We have Mandalorian at the end of the week on Fridays, 10 p.m. GMT for all of those. If you'd like to follow us on socials, that's Facebook at Cinema Savvy, Twitter at Cinema_Savvy. And if you'd like to pick up any merch, we do have a TeePublic store where you can pick up some t-shirts on there. Link to that is in the description down below. That'll do it for our review on Mank. So until the next video, we'll see you guys next time. Take care.